Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a wonderful new edition of Friday Ramblings. I am your perpetual host, David, aka the Bardic One. And we're going to drop a lot of information on you this Friday because this is actually the first of a special two-part episode. That's right, you're going to get two episodes in one fabulous Friday today because, well, technical errors prevented me from posting the video I had intended to post last week. And by the time I got those worked out, I had already lost more than a day, and other obligations had started coming up. I didn't want to post it on Tuesday because that's when I post the game stream on line, and I kind of like to keep the two different kind of video theme series as separated a bit. So I thought about it and I figured, you know what? I can hit up two videos with highly similar themes and just give people a double dose to make up for the fact that you've had to wait 14 days for your latest vlog instead of the traditional 7. Of course, for those of you who are marathoning the archives, this really is kind of a awkward intro since you're marathoning the archives and you're not watching these as they post live, but that's okay because I do care about my fans and I do want to make sure that things are laid out. And we're going to go ahead and have this on the video so there will be a record of the fact that, hey, sometimes I goof. So, what are we going to do for our special double episode bonanza? Simple. We're going to break down two meta franchises from our friends Capcom. And in fact, they may be the two most important franchises Capcom has ever created. Now, what's a meta franchise? Well, it's very simple. Meta franchise is where instead of a game with a relatively simple formula of, okay, here's game 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, with a few occasional minor ignorable spin-offs. These are game series where they take the very base concept and they go into full-blown world building with the continuity and the storyline from games to games. Which means that basically you can just play a handful of games or play one of every 3, 4, 5, 6 games in the series and still see the progression of the ongoing story, at least in the case of one. Now we're going to help break this down a little bit when we get into specifics, but for part 1 we're going to go with the iconic, legendary fighting game series, Street Fighter. And as we go, you'll see what I mean about you don't have to play every game in the series to keep track of the ongoing mythos. Now, it all started pretty simple. Capcom created a fighting game called Street Fighter, in which player 1 was always Ryu. Yep, Ryu's been there from the beginning. And you would play through beating several people in a worldwide tournament. This being the theme that would drive the entire franchise, that these fights are part of an organized tournament to recognize the world champion. The original Street Fighter game also introduced Ryu's best friend and respected rival, Ken Masters, who was selected by player 2 if somebody else threw their quarter in the arcade machine and made it a player versus player battle instead of player versus computer. Now here's where it gets a little fun. If player 2 wins that battle and player 1 chooses not to rematch, the tournament against the computer controlled players continues, but now it is Ken that is going through them instead of Ryu. Now, Street Fighter did pretty respectable, but It was a very early fighting game. Give me a second. Let me go. Yeah, 1987 was when it debuted. Specifically, there's 10 opponents. And while it did do good in the arcade, did see some ports to some early home systems, specifically the PC. And a few years later in life, just give me a little itchy itch there, the TurboGrafx CD console, where for some odd reason it was renamed Fighting Street. The game has, by and large, been eclipsed by its various sequels. Which is okay. These things happen. Let's be honest. Most people picking on another classic Uber series, they know Super Mario Brothers, but they may have never heard of Mario Brothers. Now, Street Fighter has been ported and put into various collections released over the years. There's the Capcom Classics Collection on the PlayStation Portable, Capcom Classics Collection Volume 2 for PlayStation 2 and Xbox, and most recently a port was included in the Street Fighter 30th Anniversary Collection for various 8th generation consoles and Windows-based computer systems. So, its legacy does live on, but simply put, only, people that were playing arcade games in the late 80s there, or really hardcore Street Fighter players, have played the original Street Fighter. Because there was a span of a lot of years there where it was very hard to find a copy. Now, I admit I did have it on PC. I had gotten it in a 3-game bundle as a Christmas present. And I mean, again, maybe it's that it was the PC port of an arcade game, and PC games, or the PC system, especially if you don't have a really good gaming joystick setup, are not always the best for translating fighting game controls. I mean, it was a fun game to mess with. It was nice to see where a series that I had played previously with the much more famous sequel, which we will touch on in a second. As I said, we're going to break down the whole of the series here. Started out with. But, again, it's kind of like Mario Brothers to Super Mario Brothers. You can see where the things they learned did and didn't work in the first game definitely made a much improved sequel. So let's get to that. In 1991, Street Fighter II The World Warrior was released. After the kind of in continuity, kind of wasn't, it ended up becoming its own thing. 1989 beat-up game Final Fight, which they initially branded as a sequel to Street Fighter, but ended up letting it become its own thing, although several Final Fight characters have since migrated into later Street Fighter games as playable characters. So it's kind of one of those things where Final Fight was supposed to be Street Fighter 2, then it became something else, then it kind of got absorbed back into the Street Fighter meta franchise. As of right now, personally, I consider Final Fight a far outlier spin-off series. You can play the Final Fight games without knowing anything about Street Fighter, and there's nothing you're going to feel lost about. And again, you can play the later Street Fighter games that have the Final Fight characters in there without feeling like you have to play the Final Fight games to understand what they're doing here. So it's a thing. Final Fight is its own beast, although it was not always intended to be. There's your trivia note. So yes, we come to Street Fighter II The World Warrior. Now this is where things start getting tricky and the meta franchise idea started forming. Now, Street Fighter II was a huge hit. Everybody played it. It was ported to all the home consoles. It was ported to portable consoles. I mean, there were Game Boy copies of Street Fighter 2. It was Tiger Electronics, little AA battery, beep, 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 watch graphic copies of Street Fighter 2. We all know Street Fighter 2. The animated movie. The live-action movie with the late Raul Julia and Jean-Claude Van Damme. On the silence for Raul Julia. The American cartoon series. Lots just Street Fighter 2 everywhere. There was an iconic, well, not iconic, but there was a very long-running comic by a company called Udon. I name drop this because that is going to come up again later, as Udon did a very good job with the comic and introduced a lot of concepts into it that would be confirmed canon within the game series. Yes, Street Fighter 2 is where the series cemented itself as one of the all-time great video games and something that would forever be etched in video game history. However, what Capcom did to follow it up is where things get confusing and where we really need to start paying attention, folks. Because as I said, this is where the idea of the meta franchise was born. See, instead of simply making a Street Fighter 3 follow-up, once the Street Fighter 2 mania started to die down a bit, they instead rode the wave of momentum of Street Fighter 2 and released an upgrade game. They refer to this as Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition. Sorry, folks, I had to consult my notes, make sure I was quoting the right one. I want to get these in the right order. Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition was released to arcades and subsequent home console release. The big change with Champion Edition is that the 4 computer boss characters you fought at the end of Street Fighter 2, this would be Vega, Balrog, Sagat, and M. Bison, were now able to be played by the human players. This was kind of a big deal. Because, I gotta tell you, somebody who remembered Street Fighter 2 before the Champion Edition came out, I know everybody that was playing it, we all thought the same thing. Oh man, God, I wish I could play as M. Bison. He is so cool. He's so powerful. Oh, and Vega with the mask and the little Freddy Krueger claw hand. Why can't I play as them? Well, there you go. Capcom gave us what we're all clamoring for. Now, the other big thing was that 2 players could now choose the same character, creating what we now is pretty much a thing in fighting games and a few other video games with multiple character choices of the alternate attire. Same clothes, but different colors. Thus, the player versus player mirror match was born, at least for Street Fighter. Now later, we got Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and sometimes called Hyper Fighting, depending again, kind of like Street Fighter 2 was technically Street Fighter 2 The World Warrior. Most people just called it Street Fighter 2, so for sake of saving a few seconds here and there, we're just going to call it Street Fighter 2 Turbo. That and the ports got a little fun and game with the naming scheme of Turbo. So, yeah, we're just going to call it Street Fighter 2 Turbo for clarification. Now, Turbo offered faster gameplay than its predecessor, some different character costume colors, a few new special techniques. Basically, it took what Champion Edition did and took it up another level, introducing the idea of faster gameplay to give those folks that played Street Fighter 2 religiously a higher difficulty rating when it comes to your reflexes. Of course, for people like me, that kind of stink at fighting games because we don't have super quick reflexes, an ability to, in 0.5 seconds, remember the button commands for every move a character can do and know the perfect move to use as a counter for this situation. Kind of made the game a really, really lot harder. That's why, personally, for my money, I'm not really a huge fan of Street Fighter 2 Turbo. Sorry, but as I said, I don't have a lot of fighting game skills in Turbo in a lot of ways. With that faster gameplay, does feel like it was made more for the higher skilled players. And that is neither good nor bad. I'm just throwing in my personal 2 cents and perspective on these various updates. However, they were not finished updating Street Fighter 2. I told you folks, meta franchise. Street Fighter 2 is in and of itself basically a series. But hey, come on! Now we can play the boss characters. Now we can mirror match. We got faster gameplay once we really start mastering the game. What more could you want? Oh, and they tweaked the graphics up a little bit too. How about more characters? Super Street Fighter 2, the new challengers, not only gave the game a complete graphical and musical overhaul, but introduced 4 new playable characters. That's right, just like Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition lets you play as the 4 bosses, Super Street Fighter 2 gave you 4 brand new characters. Alright, let me see. Real quick, let me flip through my notes here. Those characters would be Cammy, DJ, Fei Long, and T-Hawk. Cammy especially has gone on to be an iconic character in the Street Fighter series, with her long blonde hair and British background. She in fact did show up in the previously mentioned live-action movie. However, because one of the things Super Street Fighter 2 did was restore the gameplay, speed, and style back to what Street Fighter 2 Champion Edition had, we got one final revision, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, which brought back the faster gameplay of Street Fighter 2 Turbo, introduced a new level of special techniques known as Super Combo, had a hidden character, Akuma, who has gone on to be a major player in the Street Fighter meta franchise, and of course included the 4 new characters from Super Street Fighter 2. Now, before we leave this, let's go ahead and throw it in. Many years later, after true sequel Series S came out, they did continue to tweak the Street Fighter 2 game and re-release it on newer consoles. So real quick, let's go ahead and bust this out. Hyper Street Fighter 2, the Anniversary Edition, which was released to commemorate the 15th anniversary of the series, was the final arcade installment, and is a hybrid version of Super Turbo, which allows players to select between versions of characters from all 5 previous Street Fighter 2 games. Thus, it was basically a mix and match salute to the entire Street Fighter 2 sub-franchise at this point. Later, we had Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo HD Remix, which has fully redrawn artwork, including HD sprites drawn by artists from Udon, who I mentioned earlier as producing the important Street Fighter 2 comic book. Finally, Ultra Street Fighter 2, The Final Challengers, was released for the Nintendo Switch. It is based off Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo and features 2 graphical styles, classic pixel art and updated high definition art, as well as new gameplay mechanics and modes, along with tweaks to the game's balance to reflect the ongoing work that other games did in an attempt to provide better balance between the different characters. This is a thing in the fighting genre. When you get really deep into the fighting genre, especially on a professional, competitive, tournament type level, you hear a lot about balance and tiers. I'm not enough of a hardcore fighting game person to get into that, except that it does exist. The basic idea is that if fighting games are not carefully programmed, or sometimes are intentionally programmed this way, certain characters are so overpowered that they make the game super easy to play, and certain characters are made to be so exceptionally weak that essentially playing them is like playing the hard mode of the game. Now that's all well and good when you're playing against computer AIs, but when you are, as I said, playing things like competitive tournaments, it does kind of create a situation where certain characters are going to give players an advantage, or just plain never picked, because they give the player disadvantages. Thus, good fighting games will work to tweak the balance so that you can pick a low-tier character, and if you get good enough at them, still provide plenty of competition against highly skilled human players. I'm not going to get into saying who is in what tier, because as I said, that's a little higher level for me. There are certainly a lot of resources online if you do want to get into tiered characters. Now characters are ranked when you play online and play in tournaments and all that. It's a thing. But yes, game balance gets tweaked as games go on. So, now we get to the first true sequel series. And amusingly, it is actually a prequel series. Street Fighter Alpha Warrior's Dreams was the next series within the meta franchise to come out. And the game uses the same character designs Capcom previously employed in Darkstalkers and X-Men Children of the Atom, with settings and character designs heavily influenced by Street Fighter II, the animated movie. Now, Alpha did expand on the Super Combo system from Super Turbo, also introduced alpha counters and chain combos, which were influenced by Darkstalkers. The plot of Alpha is set between Street Fighter 1 and Street Fighter 2, fleshes out the backstories and grudges held by many of the classic characters that were introduced in Street Fighter 2, features a playable roster of 10 immediately playable characters and 3 unlockable fighters, comprising not only younger versions of established characters, but also characters from the original Street Fighter and our old friend Final Fight. It would get 2 sequels, Street Fighter Alpha 2 and Street Fighter Alpha 3. Now, Street Fighter Alpha 3 introduces 3 selectable fighting styles and further expands playable roster to 28 characters. And the home console versions expanded that character roster even further by adding the remaining new challengers from Super Street Fighter 2. So, this means timeline-wise, it's Street Fighter 1, Street Fighter 2, and then Alpha in between up here. Fun for the timelines. Now, I really haven't played the Alpha series too much. Honestly, after Street Fighter 2 and its various upgrades, semi-sequels, I kind of faded out of the fighting Street Fighter series for a while. But given the amount of new characters they introduced and the massive overhaul to the continuity that Street Fighter II created, with the introduction of M. Bison and his Shadowloo organization, I like the idea of prequel material being written to help bridge the gap between Street Fighter and Street Fighter II. I support the idea of this series. I'm just not as familiar with it as I am with the Street Fighter II series, and that's okay. You know, I think I did. Now, I did play a little bit of the first alpha. After it had been out for a while, I think after Alpha 3 had come out, I found the first alpha in arcade and just kind of fiddled around with it just to kill time. So, as I said, not super familiar with it, but I have played the alpha series in and of itself, at least the first game in it. Now, we're going to kind of, as far as timelines go, jump to the side a little bit. We're going to go diagonal. Street Fighter EX, which was co-produced with Arika, a company founded by Street Fighter II planner Akira Nishitani, and was developed for the PlayStation-based ZN-1 hardware. Now, EX combined the established Street Fighter cast with original characters created and owned by Arika. It was followed by an upgraded version, Street Fighter EX Plus, which further expanded the character roster, led to two sequels, EX2 and EX3. EX3, in fact, being released as a launch game for the PlayStation 2. Street Fighter EX2 also had a plus upgrade. Now, the big thing Street Fighter EX did was introduce the tag team system, a mode that let a single player fight up to 3 opponents simultaneously. Now, as well as bringing in the idea of using 3D graphics in a 2D fighting game. As I said, as far as the storyline goes, EX is kind of a spin-off series, because since it was co-produced, it kind of exists in its own continuity. So as far as the timeline goes, we're doing a little branch here. And that's okay. The tag team thing is kind of key because that has become something very important in the fighting genre as it has evolved over the past, 30 years. Certainly other fighting game franchises have touched on it. Tekken Tag Tournament 1 and 2 are personal favorites of mine. And, that's just, again, personal belief. So, that's it. Not much material with EX and Alpha. Street Fighter II, still the king with like 6 versions. A few more if you count the modern day HD update anniversary editions. But again, as I said, Street Fighter II pretty much changed the video game history. Fighting genre existed for Street Fighter II, but that's when it became something everybody wanted to jump in on. I mean, I'm sitting here talking about all these upgrades Capcom did. I'm not even touching all the tournament fighting games that other companies would release that were blatant copycats of Street Fighter II. I mean, that was just a thing in the 90s. Of course, Mortal Kombat coming in and serving as a huge rival franchise to Street Fighter II didn't help, because then, of course, you had people trying to copycat Mortal Kombat, and some did fare pretty good. We're not going to get super detailed in those. I am getting slightly off tilt. So, let's go ahead and keep going because we are not done yet. Street Fighter III New Generation made its debut in the arcades in 1997. Now, Street Fighter 3 discards most of the character roster from previous games, keeping only Ken and Ryu, introducing several new characters in their place, and moves the timeline farther down. Most notable of these new generation grapplers is Alex, who is designed to be the new lead character of the game, and Gil, who replaced Bison as the game's main antagonist. Now, Street Fighter 3 would get 2 upgrade sequels in Second Impact, which made adjustments to the gameplay, added 2 new characters, and featured the return of Akuma, and Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, which brings back Chun-Li and adds 4 more new characters. Street Fighter 3 and its various updates has been ported to assorted home consoles and is part of various Street Fighter collection discs released on more modern systems. Now, again, storyline-wise, I like that 3 not only went forward again after we took a step back with Alpha, but went forward an entire generation as a way of refreshing the roster with new characters without over-bloating it. They had an excuse to dump a lot of the previous characters because storyline-wise, they were older, they were retired, they had had students and children who were taking up the mantle of competing for the best in the world. Makes good sense. Now, we come up to Street Fighter 4. Now, Street Fighter 4 features the return of the original 12 World Warriors and brings back Akuma once again, along with 4 new characters in a story chronologically set between Street Fighter 2 and 3. So, after going forward a generation, we're now notching back another in-between game. So, real quick for you, let's go ahead and just address this again for those who need a bit of summary and didn't take notes. It goes Street Fighter, Street Fighter Alpha, Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter 4, Street Fighter 3. Nani? Yeah, kind of weird, but we're going to roll with it. Now, Super Street Fighter 4 would come out later on and include 10 additional characters, including 2 characters new to the franchise, Juri and Hakan. Capcom implemented better character balance adjustments and added second Ultra moves for each character with this upgrade. Also features an improved online experience with new modes of play. Super Street Fighter 4 would come out on various consoles, including the Nintendo 3DS. Super Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition was released in 2010, containing all the content from the console release and featuring 4 more additional characters, Yun and Yang from Street Fighter 3, as well as alternate alignment counterparts of Ryu and Akuma, known as Evil Ryu and Oni. Eventually, in 2014, we would get Ultra Street Fighter 4, released as an arcade game, a DLC add-on for existing console versions of Super Street Fighter 4, and as a standalone game containing DLC from previous iterations. Along with various tweaks and additional modes and stages, the update adds 5 additional characters from previous crossover games, which we're not going to really touch on too much in this video. No doubt in the future I'm going to do a video on crossover games in general because it gets very, very deep. Also introduces an all-new character, Dictator. Game most notably was released on PlayStation 4. Finally, we have Street Fighter V, which was released exclusive to the PlayStation 4 and PC in 2016, with 2018 having the major update of Street Fighter V Arcade Edition, and in 2019, Street Fighter V Champion Edition was released as downloadable content. So, where do we go from here? How do we wrap this up? Well, simply put, when it comes to the Street Fighter Super franchise, meta franchise, Super Series, whatever term you prefer, Street Fighter 2 Turbo is, or Street Fighter 2 is still the king with the most number of updates and remake ports, remasters, and we have, counting the EX series, which, as I said, storyline-wise is completely optional, you have, let's do the big count-off, Street Fighter, Street Fighter 2, Street Fighter Alpha, Street Fighter 4, Street Fighter 5, and Street Fighter 3. 6 main games with various amounts of upgrades and subsequels. Now, as I said, this doesn't even touch on spin-off games like Final Fight, Super Puzzle Fighter 2 Turbo, Street Fighter 2010, which was like, I mean, basically it almost doesn't count. It's got the name, but it's the super sci-fi platformer thing. It's just really weird. Various crossover games, which, as I said, I'm probably going to do a crossover sub-franchises video in general sometime in the future. But pretty much anytime Capcom plays with other people's licenses and intellectual property, they throw in some Street Fighter characters because, as I said, Street Fighter may be the most important franchise Capcom has ever created. Pretty much anybody that has played video games, especially fighting games, has played at least one of these Street Fighter games. Most likely one of the many versions of Street Fighter 2, although super new gamers may be more familiar with 4 and 5. What is the future? Will we eventually see Street Fighter 6? I don't know. But the simple fact is that you can't discuss video game history without discussing Street Fighter. And while it's not my favorite genre or favorite series in the fighting game genre, I cannot deny that I've never really hated playing any of them. You know, it's just that as different franchises came up, looked at what Street Fighter 2 was doing, mostly Street Fighter 2, because I said the original Street Fighter very quickly got eclipsed. But the Street Fighter series looked at what they were doing, looked at what players liked, put their own spin on it. Things happened. You know? I'm not throwing any shade at the Street Fighter series, but at the end of the day, you can pretty much play any of the later upgrades of any series and sub-series and be okay. You know? Play a recent HD remake port of Street Fighter 2. Play Street Fighter 5 Arcade Edition. Play Ultra Street Fighter 4. Play Street Fighter 3 Third Strike. That's all you really need. Oh, Street Fighter Alpha 3. EX 3. You know? You don't have to play every single variant edition of Street Fighter 2. You really don't. Especially since, as we touched on, the later ports have the multiple gameplay modes and so much customization of it. You can get a feel for what it's like. You can make the game your own. So, we thank you for listening. I hope I've given you a better sense of just how big the Street Fighter franchise is. And at the end of the day, never ever trust M. Bison. And hey, when it came to fighting, I always liked Dhalsim and his little super stretch arms and his fireball. Yoga fire. But you can't deny Chun-Li may be the coolest and cutest character. I mean, come on. She's law enforcement. You know? Not just like local law enforcement. She's friggin', hold on. Let me get the name of this. Interpol. Thank you. Interpol. Oof. Almost said the wrong acronym there, folks. I had to double check my notes there. But yes, she's an Interpol agent. How cool is that? You know, everybody knows Interpol. Everybody respects Interpol. Interpol's great. So, thanks for watching. If you want to go ahead and immediately watch my second Capcom-centric video that's going to drop the same day as my apology for missing a week, well, go ahead. If you want to wait a day, if you want to wait a few days, kind of stretch out how much of me you get at one time, great. But I do appreciate you watching. Subscribe, comment, do that thing you do. And when it's all said and done, hey, game on, fight on. And when push comes to shove, call in Ken Masters. Because, sorry Ryu, but hey, Ken not only became a great martial artist, he got married and had a kid. What do you got, Ryu? Just your martial arts training. Ryu really needs a girlfriend in one of these games someday. Seriously, can we work on that for like Street Fighter 6? Can we hook Ryu up with somebody proper? Have him settle down. It might be nice for him, you know. Couldn't hurt. Well, see you in a few for part 2 of this Capcom double feature. Or I'll see you in 7. Either way, appreciate you spending your time with me. Laters.